Number one is that for me, the AI business circus continues. That's all I'm going to say this year. Is there going to be a collapse? I don't know, but the circus is going to continue. And so we're going to see more circular deals. We're going to see insane capital raises. Happy New Year and welcome to It's About Data, episode 40. We're taking stock of 2025 and giving our prognostications for 2026. All right, Tony, welcome to another episode, and we've made it through most of this first year, which is
Oh my
quite an
God.
accomplishment. I think most podcasts don't last. I mean, we're not to a year yet, but at least we made it into 2026.
Don't jump to conclusions. We haven't killed each other yet.
Because we're remote. Like, we know we're not in the same
Thank
physical
God we've
location.
got 2,000 miles separating us.
Yeah. And we want to thank our subscribers. As of the time we're recording, we're at 13,900 some subscribers. So we should hit 14K by the time this episode goes live. So thank you to everyone who's subscribed.
And it just blows my mind, but it shows you really the power of being consistent and having good content.
Yeah. Hopefully it's good. People are still listening so far.
At least we want to think so.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yes, what is the actual theme? We're still alive, but also we are in 2026 now. And first thing we want to do is review the last year. So why don't you kick that off?
Yeah. Well, put it this way. It was kind of, I was, sort of recounting this. I do a wrap up, a forecast every year. And last year I basically said it was just kind of hard to escape the elephant in the room, which was generative AI.
Yeah.
This year, I would say that pivoted to a couple things, which was one, agents.
Yes.
And two, basically speculation or questions about, are we in a bubble?
And I will say, I don't feel like this is the elephant in the room anymore. I think it's the whole room, basically.
Yeah.
And it feels very, very bubbly, but it also feels extremely hard to predict when anything might burst, frankly.
Yeah. The good news, though, in all this is that there are practical alternatives, and that's basically the stuff for another episode. That's the type of stuff that we spoke with Vin last year about small models. So I mean, this is not this is not a black or white situation, but obviously basically following the money right now, which is getting increasingly circuitous.
Yes. Very
circuitous, which is okay in the early in the beginnings. The question is though. You can't keep going that way. So, I mean, it's certainly fine to basically subsidize customers in the beginning if those customers are then going to run off and then be profitable and buy more of your product. So, I mean, we're not going to say do or die. But anyway, just kind of looking out over the list, over the past year, I had predicted that Dave was going to have, with all the attention on AI, that was actually going to prompt a renaissance for data.
Yeah.
And I would say that prediction came partly true in terms of that we did see a lot of action. Well, first off, continued collapsing of the modern data stack that was already happening. IBM and Confluent which is pending at the acquisition, is the latest evidence of that. But we also saw a lot of emphasis on data sharing.
Yes.
We also saw that Iceberg essentially pretty much cemented its position as the open table format, the default standard. One, Oracle finally got its act together there, but more importantly, Databricks, finally made it a first-class citizen, which we could predict, after acquisition of Tabular, but it actually did happen.
Right, because they could have killed it, right? That was the alternative play. Like they kind of suppress it and use their own sharing format instead.
Right. But the other thing that I think that's just really interesting, which really showed that the AI folks really are paying attention to data, was the almost overnight rise of Model Context Protocol, MCP.
Yes. Yeah. Without data, your models are very, very limited, basically.
Right. Exactly.
Discovered pretty early.
Right. So anyway, and as I said, I don't know if we covered this before, but as I said, we talked about the AI bubble, but as I said, there are practical alternatives. But anyway, I think we just have a few minutes here. We want to look ahead to the future. Matt, what do you see coming in 2026?
All right. So I have 4 predictions. I'm going to go through these fast. I'm not going to go real deep, although we'll talk about them a bit. But some of these will turn into other episodes, I think. So number 4, graph query languages emerge as a key skill for analysts and data scientists alongside SQL. And if you want to kind of see where that's coming from, we did an episode with Waymo Liu from PuppyGraph about his company, which instead of building a new graph database, built a graph query engine that connects to existing data sources. And you've talked about how many vendors are actually doing the same thing. And I think that indicates that we need something for certain cases more powerful than SQL. And this is it. And I think this is finally going to bring graphs into the mainstream. Maybe it won't happen in 2026, but I think it's happening over time already.
Yeah, this recalls my colleague Carl Olson, formerly of IDC, and he always kept saying, "Is this going to be the year of graph?" And he's been saying that for about 4 or 5 years.
Right. It's like nuclear fusion, right? It's 20 years ahead of its time, and it always will be. But actually, maybe we're getting to the point where this is really going to happen.
The irony of all this is, I think, really where graph is really happening right now is really under the hood with knowledge graphs, not necessarily knowledge graphs that developers are putting together, because that's tough stuff.
Right.
But really, what's the underlying, basically, and this gets into what we're going to be talking about for 2026 about semantics. Well, it's basically the underlying knowledge graphs to essentially like Microsoft 365 to SAP to ServiceNow, et cetera, et cetera. Right. I do see that in terms of, I was looking at, we were talking about GraphRag last year, and I think more talk than adoption at this point.
Yeah. It's still, that's the thing with a lot of this technology, and we'll get to this at a later point, but
exactly,
everyone is moving so fast that they're not even really slowing down, but I think that is changing, which I'll come back to.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Number 3, Matt. Number 3, drum roll.
Number 3, and this has been going on for a few years, to be honest. I don't think this is happening overnight, but I think the trend will continue. And that is data modeling. And by that, I mean things like Kimball and Inman and alternatives is making a comeback. And, I would say during the era of the modern data stack, one big table, or at least very wide tables, were the dominant paradigm. And we didn't really worry about those things. And I think now normalization is becoming more important again. And part of that goes back to number 4, that if you want to apply graph techniques to in-place data, you need a normalized schema to do that. And so I think we'll see that trend continue. Joe Reis, business partner, co-author, good friend, has a substack called Practical Data Modeling and is working on a book on that. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And I think other people are doing similar things, honestly. So
I loved his valiant attempt to try and get Ralph Kimball and Inman up on the same stage.
Didn't materialize.
No,
but the legends, they laid the groundwork, and so now it's time for us to return to some of those foundations, I think.
Even though those foundations were 2 very different directions.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the open question. I think I've long said that maybe we need some new approaches, some new iterations of those existing versions of data modeling, but that doesn't mean that data modeling is not important, which has kind of been the attitude for the last 5 to 10 years, frankly.
Yeah. I'm convinced basically in this industry, basically history goes in cycles. It's just that each cycle, and we may revisit, let's say, certain ideas, but we start from we come from a different starting point.
Right. Agree. And I think that the same is true with data, right? Like you talked about data emerging as more important. Data never goes away, right? But it kind of waxes and wanes in importance depending on what the trends are. And I think it's waxing right now with its core importance for generative AI and agents, basically.
Sorry, folks, but you and I are never going away.
That's right. You're stuck with us.
Number 2.
Number 2, broadly, AI engineering continues to mature. So this ties into what you were saying earlier about people talking about GraphRag and not deploying it, sometimes talking about things like ontology and semantics, but not deploying those. I think in 2026, we're actually going to see more and more focus on that maturity aspect, on actually making these technologies work. And I'm going to cite one of our guests in his book. So Lakshmanan, we had on as a guest to talk about his recent book, Generative AI Design Patterns. And when the books start coming out, that's when okay, people are starting to put a stake in the ground about what best practices are. And there are other AI engineering books. There are a variety of books I'll post some links to. But I think we're getting to the point where we're actually implementing some best practices instead of just rushing headlong into the hype, which frankly is probably what's happened heretofore.
Yeah, his episode really did strike a nerve. It was one of the last episodes of the year, and yet it got tens of thousands of views.
Yeah,
as everybody was getting ready for for the holiday season. Yeah, they couldn't miss it.
Yeah, and so I'll put a link to that. I think I'm going to write a longer piece about it at some point when I get that out. I mean, we
only skimmed the surface, and I definitely want to get him back.
Yeah, great guest, great broad perspective, well beyond that book. He's written like 7 books, but yeah, that's a big theme, is just this maturation,
Yeah.
semantics, ontologies, all these they're like frameworks that you need. They're like scaffolding to make Gen AI and agents work. And I think we're just now getting to the point where we're maturing those practices.
Yeah. And that gets us to number one.
Number one. So in general,
And don't disappoint us, Matt.
Yeah.
You're leading us here.
We've predicted again and again that we're in a bubble, right? I think broadly, I think most people who are objective probably think that there's some kind of a bubble going on, and that there are those who believe that it's going to be a catastrophic collapse, and there are those who believe that it's going to deflate, but then we're going to continue on up a long-term trajectory, kind of like 1999 into the 2000s, with the emergence of Amazon, Facebook, Google really getting to be powerful, very successful, profitable companies. Number one is that for me, the AI business circus continues. That's all I'm going to say this year. Is there going to be a collapse? I don't know, but the circus is going to continue. And so we're going to see more circular deals. We're going to see insane capital raises, and maybe we'll see some cracks start to appear in the foundations as well if things get really out of control. But you look at OpenAI just raised $40 billion. That is an insane amount of money. And if you look at their raise trajectory, it's like an exponential growth scale. And at some point, there's this concept of carrying capacity where you can't grow exponentially forever. At some point, you hit a wall, and you either hit the wall and slow down, or you hit the wall and you bounce off of it, right? Like where a population just collapses because it's growing too fast. And the question is, which of those two are we heading into? I think this year will really tell.
And I'll add one more question to that.
Okay.
Will Databricks finally IPO this year?
Yeah, IPOs are interesting. So I'll have to track down the link, but there are I think OpenAI is pretty openly planning their next raise round.
Right.
But there are also credible sources from within OpenAI saying that they're considering an IPO at some point. There's also a discussion that SpaceX is seriously considering an IPO. Now, the markets giveth and the markets taketh away.
Right.
And I think that venture capital is terrified of the power of markets, which is part of the reason we're not seeing a lot of IPOs right now. So on the one hand, you do an IPO, you can raise insane amounts of capital, but all of a sudden people have the ability to sell shares that they couldn't sell before. And so your valuation can also collapse. And so I'll be very curious to see if we see some of these IPOs, if people jump into the abyss on this or not this coming year.
There's such an irony here, because venture backers usually look for, invest with the idea of having an eventual exit. And now they're really scared of the exit.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, okay, there's all this capital available that NVIDIA has because they're a public company. But yeah, again, NVIDIA's value could collapse overnight if people decide to dump their shares.
Right. Yeah. As I said, I still keep my question alive about Databricks. But anyway, that's
no, absolutely. I just say it's one of many potential IPOs.
Oh, no question. But actually, one of which is actually a real viable company, as opposed to basically a company that's been built on hype.
Yeah. Yeah. And SpaceX looks that way too, right? Now, Elon Musk is running it, which always means there's a big hype element there, but they're doing real stuff.
I have a lot more belief in Ghodsi.
Yes. Well, he's a realist for one thing, right? Like
exactly.
He constantly talks about the nature of hype and how a lot of he's the one we quoted a while ago about how agents are not mature and they need human oversight right at the height of the AI hype cycle, AI agent hype cycle. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, so let's kind of move on to to my own take, and obviously there certainly there are a lot of these trends happening.
Right.
I'm just trying to focus on my lane, and what I'm expecting in 2026 is that this is going to be the kind of like the convergence or emergence or solidification of what I'll call semantic spheres of influence.
Yeah.
And to me, I got kind of clued into this last year when we met down at Day Texas, where I just saw everybody talk about context. Everybody talk about the need for knowledge engineers. And the fact is that when I came into the year, I kept thinking, well, AI needs good data, but it also needs the right data.
Yeah.
And that's where semantics comes in. And I've seen a number of things happen over the past year that really give me a sense that 2026 is really where semantics really is where value. It's like we say knowledge is power. I think semantics now is power.
Yeah, agreed.
Because that's saying, is my definition of customer the same as your definition of customer? And it's kind of like the old master data management argument, like who has the golden definition? And in a diverse world, it's going to be fairly diverse, and that therefore, I mean, that sort of gives rise to the fact that, like data catalogs, I think we will be seeing a lot of federation there. But
Yeah.
even that being said, though, what's interesting is some of the preemptive moves that, for instance, that SAP made with
Yeah.
Business Data Cloud, where they what SAP they did an amazing job of cleaning up their own house, which is that they have a vast portfolio of applications and acquisitions. Actually, a lot of this
Yeah.
came to acquisition, and they had many lots lots of different, whether you're talking about Ariba, or whether you're talking about core S4, that the destination for customer, or stock keeping unit, were different. And what they did over the past few years, they did their homework. They harmonized the data model across all that, and they're exposing this as data products. And it's part of their whole business data cloud strategy, which is that SAP, it has to exist in a multipolar world, but they're going to do it on their terms, which is that you cannot access their knowledge graph. What you can do is that you can get data shared, their data product. They will share their data products. Notice the data products will not move out of SAP physically, but you can get first party access to that. And that started with Databricks. And over the course of the year, Snowflake, Microsoft Fabric, and Google BigQuery joined, basically joined that bandwagon. I'm surprised that Amazon or AWS has not stepped up yet, but I think they were distracted this past year because, frankly, AWS took their sites off of data this year. I think they're going to next year. I think will be a different story, but this year they really did take their eye off the ball there with data, and that to me kind of set the tone. Another strike was basically with Microsoft with Fabric IQ.
Yep. And we're going to have an episode coming out about that sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having Yitzhak on here.
Yeah.
And of course we have Andrew, Andrew Russ talking about that. But what's interesting is that they already had the semantic tier. They were extending it to an area that basically is very dear to the heart of our friend Jessica Talisman, which is an ontology.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all these topics are going to tie together, right? Like knowledge graphs, ontologies, semantics. And that is, you have this model that's an interpretation machine, but it needs scaffolding to interpret, right? It is about interpretation. Yeah.
It's getting it all right. And look, I was talking with Juan, actually over the holiday. I kept telling Juan, get a life, go back to your family.
Madly messaging you.
But he was basically expressing concern that a lot of folks are going to start to do these sort of amateur efforts and call it a day.
Yeah, and there's a lot of influencer stuff going on in that regard. Like, maybe we could get Jessica on to talk about this, but a lot of the people running around claiming to be experts in ontologies and knowledge graphs have no background in it. And that yet you have people who have been doing this for a decade or several decades who are experts who aren't always getting the attention they probably should. It's tricky.
But again, I'm going to go like the old bank robber said, why do you go to banks? That's where the money is. And the thing is that what I'm going to say, what I'm going to proffer is that where the semantics lie. And they really lie in those enterprise applications that have had that for a long time. And also, some of the BI tools that have had their kind of their metrics tiers. That stuff is already there. It doesn't have, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What I'm saying here is kind of like a consolidation of the semantic spheres of influence, but also a federation. And so that's why I thought that Snowflake's announcement about open semantics and interchange, which maybe we should call OSI 2.0,
because there are so many OSIs.
Exactly. I mean, open systems interconnect. I wish whatever, but somebody basically needs to deal with trademarking issues. But anyway, I think that's very interesting. It's built on something called Metric Flow, which was developed actually by DBT Labs.
Oh, interesting. Which was their response to the metrics layers, I think, that were already out there, and they felt like they needed that to be a part of their product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's still a very vaguely defined. They've had one working group meeting. I can't speak for the record, but I know that even some Snowflake's rivals have actually sat in.
Yeah, like Starburst, for example, right? Like,
well, I wouldn't call Starburst so much a rival, but I'm talking about
frenemy. Let's call them a frenemy.
I will also say even enemies, but let's not mention any names here. But I do know for a fact that some of their enemies are actually listening in. So the thing is that this actually, and the way I see this is that this is really the kind of like the latest reincarnation of umbrella versus best of breed, and And I think what's really instructive, and I think I just want to conclude with this, is I think one of the things that might be, which kind of points to, I think, where the future is going, is look at Snowflake's, agreement with SAP, with SAP to essentially do data sharing from the business data cloud.
Yeah.
And yet Snowflake is also leading OSI. So I think that sort of leads to, that kind of hints to me that the future of this is that you will have semantic spheres of influence. It's the way that the application standards have kind of cemented their sort of residency.
Yeah.
But also, through these, through these, so-called open standards, if they indeed do happen, you might see some federation. God, this is going to be damn hard work. And what's going to be the other thing is I find kind of interesting and surprising, and maybe not so surprising, is that typically standards happen when you're dealing with areas which are not intrinsic, where you don't have intrinsic value add, like for instance table formats. Semantics though gets up there.
Yeah, there's definitely, this is going against the history of semantics, to your point, where typically companies like SAP try to keep that stuff in-house.
Right.
They're being forced to share more, interoperate more. And I'm very curious to watch OSI because, just like you're saying, it's getting so big that companies are basically being forced to join. Now, can they execute technically? That's an open question. But if they can, they could turn into a runaway leader where maybe even SAP will have to at least attach themselves peripherally to it to be part of the party, but we'll see.
I think the more apt metaphors can, they herd the cats.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to be, it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the circus is just going to continue from
Gotcha.
here. So.
And we'll be there.
Yes. All right. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all of our friends out there who are watching us.
Yes.
We love talking with you.
Tell your friends, more subscribers. We love more subscribers.
Exactly. The more the merrier.
That's right.
Happy New Year.
All right, Tony. Take care.